Good morning, everybody. I'm super excited about us all getting together virtually, um, and excited to really introduce our first guest on the podcast, somebody who's near and dear to all of our hearts. And, times right now are crazy. We're in the middle of this pandemic and the coronavirus and all that's caused for the health around the world. Um, the health around the country in the US, but also the economies that follow suit with the suggestions and the shutdown and all the efforts take to save people's lives. And it's an extraordinary time. And we felt like it was only fitting. You have a lot of companies that are forced to work from home. Those essential businesses, we're learning so much about what those are each day, but we wanted to spend the time today to talk about what does it mean to work from home. There are effective ways to do that, and there are ineffective ways to do that. And there's so many things that are flying around and so many companies that are being forced to really pivot and shift and try to make it through this time in a very productive manner. So we thought it'd be best to bring out somebody who's been doing that for almost 20 years. And so I wanted to introduce our first guest on the podcast, Julie Young. And Julie Young is somebody that is obviously related to Brett and myself.
Hey, Mom.
I'm going to go ahead and give that away early. But Mom, I wanted you to share a little bit about what your current position is now. And then I'll probably take a little bit of the opportunity to brag on you just to give some context of your expertise in what we're going to talk about.
Sure. So good morning, everyone, and thank you, kids and Rod. My current position is for Arizona State University. I'm a Deputy Vice President for our Education Outreach and Student Services Unit. And I have a dual role. I'm the CEO of ASU Prep Digital, which is a digital high school that is part of ASU.
Okay, great. And obviously a big part of your career, you're doing wonderful things out there, ASU, incredible institution. And a big part of your career, I guess the virtual part of your career started in the late 90s, early 2000s. So you've been out this for 2 decades. And I know initially, tell you about your experience with Florida Virtual School, but essentially the president and CEO of the founding company, Florida Virtual School, which if you can tell us a little bit about kind of where you started, where that came, and all surrounding that whole experience and that shift into virtual education, because you started as an elementary school and then moved into an administrator at an elementary school, assistant principal, and so on and so forth. So if you don't mind, share a little bit with the audience about that shift and kind of what that meant.
Sure. So believe it or not, this is my 40th year as an educator. That's pretty freaky. But Florida Virtual School was a serendipitous opportunity for me. I had taught grades 2 through 8 over my career, and I had been in several administrative positions. And my husband, their dad, was transferred to Orlando. And upon arriving, there was a grant opportunity that came the way of Orange County Public Schools. Now, prior to the move, I had done a tremendous amount of work in Lee County, Florida with instructional technology for our district, and had the opportunity to work as a consultant with IBM while still being part of the district. So when I arrived to Orlando, to Orange County, I had a very rich resume of ed tech experience, as well as lots of experience with working with IBM, and had been, kind of deep into the technical and instructional technology world. So lo and behold, a teacher in Orange County wrote a grant and a concept paper. She was a computer science teacher, and her name was Linda Hayes, and she's no longer with us. She passed. But she wrote this paper that said, if I could, because we were incredibly overcrowded and very shorthanded in terms of science and math teachers, especially computer science teachers at the time. And so she said, if I could do this virtually over the internet, I could teach kids in all different schools. And so the district submitted the grant to the Department of Education, and they came back and funded it for an initial $200,000. So when they started looking for a principal for this new school, this web school, I always tell everybody, nobody in their right mind would have given up their day job in 1996 to become a virtual school principal. And but for me, my experience surfaced, and they called, and I had a conversation, and I said, "Is this an interview?" And they said yes, and I went, "Okay, as long as I know that you're going to support me, I'll do it." And I reached out to my friends at IBM, and they rallied, and we got in a room and said, "How do we do this?" And the direction at the time from the Commissioner of Education in Florida, Frank Brogan, was go make it up and come back and tell us how we need to do this. And so that's what we did. We used our common sense about teaching and learning and children and educating, and made it up as we went along. And now it's the largest virtual school of its kind in the country, and has had a great deal of success.
That's fantastic. So that was really the shift to being in the brick and mortar. What is this virtual education thing? Let's go make this up, and let's iterate along the way. And before we kind of get into some of the questions, I wanted to brag on you a little bit. And as I obviously know your bio from growing up, but some of it still surprises me, but I think it's important to give context. And so there was an article that came out in 2011. You were the cover story of Florida Trend, and I'll just go ahead and read the snippet that I found on the internet. But Florida Trend, one of the nation's leading business applications, profiled Julie in 2011, citing that Florida Virtual School is the state's most successful online business. Speaking to her leadership and longevity as a CEO, the article said that, like a .com founder whose company never went bust, Julie Young has steered an internet-based growth rocket for 15 years. So I wanted to brag on you in that sense, to give the context that you've been at this for a long time. I know you're getting a lot of calls, and you've been gracious with your time this morning to spend some time. So that's kind of the background and the context. And I want to allow Brett and Rod to lead off with some questions. But I know the time that we wanted to spend in this next half hour has to do a lot with what it means to working virtually, what it means to being on a team that somebody's not physically right next to you. And I know a lot of companies are struggling with that right now. And so I just want to open the dialogue. And Brett and Rod, if you have any pointed questions to ask Julie, to really let her expand kind of what people's pains might be going through, and maybe some solutions that you've found with the last 20 plus years of experience in doing that.
Sure.
Go ahead, Rod.
Thanks. That was very good, Taylor. Julie, thank you for being on this morning. It's super exciting to have you on as our first guest. And as Taylor said, super fitting, given our current climate and the unknowns of working remote. The first thing that I think about is, I've worked remote. I've had people that have worked remote, not near to the degree that you've had. But one thing that I always think about is how much emphasis do you put on productivity versus the autonomy that people have when they're at home? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So just to kind of lay some groundwork, there are about 70% of the professionals in the world right now work remotely. That's according to a study from the International Workplace Group. So it's a large percentage of our working population are now working remotely. When we started doing this literally in 1996, 97 timeframe, it's kind of funny because, the rule was that, teachers couldn't work from home. The rule was teachers couldn't have a beeper. There were no cell phones or brick cell phones at the time. And so there was this really interesting balance of, almost a little bit of a tug of war of, we need to let these people go home and work because we don't want them tied to a building from 7 or 8 in the morning until 3 or 4 in the afternoon as teachers. And then when their kids need them at night, they've already put in a full day. And so, what we wanted them is we wanted them to have the opportunity from 8 in the morning until 8 at night to be on call to our students, depending on our students' needs. So to your point about productivity, for me, it's a huge emphasis. I look at outcomes and productivity as opposed to time. And, it kind of goes hand in hand in my space with the fact that, all of our kids go to school, from 8 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon or what have you. And the way that states fund their schools is based on how much time those kids spend in that building. Mm-hmm. I can tell you that that has less to do with what they learn and more to do with them checking a box of being on campus. So I equate the same thing with a remote workforce. There are some people that need to spend 10 hours getting 8 hours of work done. There are other people that need to spend 6 hours to get 8 hours of work done. But at the end of the day, it's all about production.
Hey, that's a cool,
interesting
thought. I have a question, maybe a little lighthearted. This is my ignorance to my age, but when you started the school, was that Dialup? Was that like right at Dialup? Like, how do you even? Not only is it, nobody even knew what a virtual work environment was at that time, but most people didn't even know what virtual anything was at the time. And how do you have an internet connection speed to be able to even get this thing off the ground?
Yeah. So very good question. It was dial-up. And so when we started to create courses, most of it was text and clip art, certainly no media whatsoever or any way to really create any. And so primarily the medium was email. So if you think about what we're doing now and the bandwidth that takes and the real-time opportunity that we have here to chat, that obviously did not exist. There was no text, there was no chat. So everything was done via email.
So this is a question I've had, and this is a perfect lead-in. So obviously we're able to do a Skype here and we're able to see each other, right? Which is a pretty high touch. I know you're huge on high touch. Just because there's high tech doesn't mean it's not high touch. Maybe I'll let you spend some time talking about that. And we've borrowed that with our business from you. But this, from a culture standpoint, as we've learned it from you too, that we're culture fanatics. We're culture freaks. I mean, that's the biggest thing in our business. It's, if we had to, ride off into the sunset right now, I know Taylor, Rod, and I, that's how we would want to be remembered. That's how we would want this company to be remembered. And there's a lot of conversations that we've had about people working remotely, and take the productivity out of the window. You lack that social interaction with people. So, and I think back of what you're saying. Like, was there times when you were working with people and you didn't even know you didn't even know what they looked like? Did people not even? I mean, all you knew was their IM name on the chat or on their email. I mean, what's the difference between that and now? And how did you blend culture when people didn't even really know what each other looked like versus now when you're able to do stuff like this? And has it helped?
For the first probably 3 to 4 years, we had office space. And so people would come into the office a certain amount of time and then work from home a certain amount of time. And so, for probably the first, 5 to 6 years, I knew everybody by face and by name, and probably knew their kids' names. But then as we grew, obviously, when I left Florida Virtual School in 2017, I had 2,500 employees. To put that in perspective, I have 100 now, and it's weird, but we got to know each other through the emails and the text messages, and We did things like, made sure that within the systems, everywhere we could put a picture, we put a picture. Once there was an opportunity to be able to take video of any kind, then, we would certainly encourage people to, share some of their personal videos that, with folks. I would try to do as much video in terms of, if we were doing, a conference call or something like that, I would, try to do video once it was available. But a lot of it was that you got to know each other's personalities through their writing. And I did I'm an over communicator in almost every sense of the word, and tried to bring as much of my personality and who I was as a person into the communication, so that they would have the opportunity to get to know me as a person. And then I encourage them to do the same. We would do regular conference calls, but obviously as you got bigger, that was difficult for it to be anything but a one-way conversation. And then very early on, literally the first year that we started back in 1997, we started doing what we called a staff conference, where we got everybody together once a year for a couple of days to do professional development and socialization. And the first one was 20 people, and the last one that I attended was 2,500 people.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Julie, I have a question that Rod hit on earlier. Because you look at what the current state and the shift to now the remote workstations for people. And you talked about productivity and being more outcome based rather than, punching a time clock and making sure that, you're in a chair for a certain amount of hours. And I think you approach kids' education the same way throughout your career. And, I think how much of that is on the employer and how much is on the employee as far as the responsibilities that you adopt to have that level of ownership in a space where you don't have anybody looking over your shoulder by design or that you're forced. Where's the responsibility line? What have you seen, the things that have worked really well, and then for people that really struggle that environment, and maybe some ways that they can improve just from a day-to-day tactical standpoint?
So it is a very different work environment. When we go into a workplace, we leave, everything from home, at home, and then we walk into a completely different space, and just the space itself kind of puts you into this is work mode. And so, when I think about what the employer needs to do in terms of creating a successful work environment with a remote environment is, first and foremost, establish very clear goals and guidelines. A telecommuting policy is not a bad thing. People like to know their parameters. And so you have to think about, if you're front facing to a customer, for example, that's very different than if you are a work from home person that you're just, you're doing your thing pretty much by yourself. If you're front facing to a customer, you have to think about things like kids in the background or dogs barking in the background, or what happens when the doorbell rings, and all those kinds of things. So establishing the goals of you have to have a personal space and a home office of some sort. That home office in some states requires that you actually have a door. So the dining room is not optimal unless you are, it's just you and your spouse or you in that environment. Making sure that if you do want somebody to be available for a certain period of time, that they understand that, they can't be distracted during that time. For example, with me, since we wanted our teachers to be available for students at night and on the weekends, because we had so many kids that worked at night and on the weekends, we gave teachers some flexibility during the day. So if they needed to run an errand or needed to get a haircut or wanted to go volunteer in their child's classroom, that was acceptable. We just wanted to make sure that their manager knew that they weren't going to be available during that certain period of time. You use tools like, the instant messenger allows you that we had, back in the day. Now there's, Teams and Zoom and all these other different tools within our systems. You can actually, put a do not disturb, or I'm out of the office, or I'll be right back, those kinds of things. So we encouraged people to use those types of tools. So first and foremost, it's on the employer to establish the guidelines that they want. And then, we always try to make sure that the employee knew those guidelines before they ever said, sign me up. So they knew what they were signing up for. Then in terms of the employee, again, very deliberate conversations about what it meant to be a remote employee in a remote workforce, so that when you're doing the interview process, you can get a sense of that person's responsibility level, commitment level, but also, can they really pull this off? Mm-hmm. And so my feeling was that you had to just do a tremendous job hiring, and then you have to trust your people and give them guidelines.
So it sounds like a heavy focus and a transparency within your communication about what your expectations are before you set off on this journey. Because I know a lot of people that haven't worked from home before, their initial reaction is like, oh, this is going to be great. And when they actually get to work from home, all of the distractions can be overwhelming for people. As you mentioned, the kids, the dogs, and specifically in the time we're in where, there's no childcare in this pandemic situation. And that's a whole balancing act. And that's a shift to me that I think we'll see that'll come out of this crisis, is how companies approach that. Because there's probably a balance between both. There's probably people that it's just not a fit for, or there are people that it is a fit for. So that's an interesting thing, and how companies adopt after this will be really interesting to me.
And let me just add on, because you mentioned the kids. In our guidelines, it clearly states that children cannot be in your space, and if you have children under a certain age, you need to have childcare. Mm-hmm. So to your point about this scenario, where childcare is either non-existent or very scarce, that creates another whole dynamic. And so we're working through what that looks like, and how do you manage
if we lost that last part. Hey, can you hear me okay, guys?
Yep, I can hear you.
I think basically, how do you manage through that? I missed that, so maybe I was the only one that missed that. Do you mind sharing, number one, some of those policies and procedures? Because I'm interested in that, right? We have policies and procedures for the office, right? But what does policies and procedures look like for a virtual workforce? Number one, not having kids in your space. That's super insightful, because you want to be sensitive, but at the same time, that can be a significant distraction, right? So that's interesting. I never heard that. So can you share what couple of those would be, just some examples like that? And then also, I'm just interested to see what would be an interview question that you would ask somebody during that interview that would give you some insight as to if this is going to be a good fit or not. Like, I would love to be in that interview, just like listening, because usually the interview questions, they come in a package that, you don't really know why you're asking the question. So if you could give some insight on both those things, that'd be great.
Sure. And also let me just reiterate, children in the space, especially in current times, that's what we're managing through. And what does that look like? And people are very accepting of it right now. It's kind of like, if you remember the BBC blooper that came out a few months ago, where the broadcaster, the news anchor, was doing the news, and all of a sudden his children came in the room, and then the next thing you knew, his wife crawled in the room to get the child and drag him out. So, that's what we're experiencing right now in this situation. But in normal times, obviously the ideal is that you have your workspace and children are not in the workplace if you are customer facing. So, okay, so back to the interview. The reason that made me smile is because it was pretty easy. We would just ask the question, why would you like to work? Why would you like to work here? And you would be surprised how many people would say, well, I have a new baby and I want to be home with the baby.
Oh, wow.
So red flag. Wrong answer. So, good answer. I'm a new mom and I'd like to be able to manage my schedule differently. And, I have childcare, but at the same time, this would give me an opportunity to be, home and have a little bit more of a flexible schedule. I could work more at night, more on the weekends, those kinds of things. But you would be surprised how often that happened. And, what you're hoping to hear, obviously, from a candidate when you ask, why would you like to work here, is, well, I'd like to work here because I understand this is a dynamic environment and the work you're doing is awesome and I'm passionate about education or insurance. And so that one was pretty easy.
It has nothing to do with They would never say, oh, because I get to work from home, right? That's just part of the deal. It would be more focused on the mission, the cause of the actual company. But if somebody comes out and says it's from home, you might have a red flag that goes up.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that can certainly be something, wouldn't, depending on the rest of the answer, it would certainly not rule anyone out because, I like working from home. I also like working from the office. I like the blend. And I think you all do too. Probably most people like the blend. But yeah.
Good. That's fascinating. It makes sense because that's like somebody walking into a brick and mortar, asking them why do they want to work here, and they immediately say like a specific employee benefit that you offer, right? Well, I heard you had a really good X benefit. You kind of look and go, I don't know if that's the main driver you want, as far as to work here. Yeah, that's interesting.
Right.
Makes sense.
Julie, I would like to, first thing you said, I took a couple notes here a little bit ago. You talked about being an over communicator, which I love, and it certainly shows in your style for giving really cool answers and articulate answers, and obviously very experienced answers, which I appreciate. I'd like to shift a little bit from the idea of the virtual concept and ask you about your opinions of and the importance of the written word in a virtual environment, if that makes sense. I only thought of that because you talked about how important it was to be communicating in those early days when there wasn't this video interaction. So I immediately thought of the power of the written word and tone, and it's hard to convey a tone when you're writing it to someone, but it sure is easy to read maybe a snippy tone. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving a concept or your feelings on the importance of the written word as an over communicator and how important that may be for someone that isn't an over communicator, if that makes sense.
Yep, it does. So another kind of guide that I live by is how important it is that in a remote environment, especially in today's world, what we're doing right now is incredibly critical. Having that opportunity for face-to-face communication. The other night, Brett and I were watching a friend of ours on Facebook. They had a wine and cheese party with their children, and they were in 3 states. And it was on Facebook Live, and it was so funny. So I think that's still, that's really an awesome, that is kind of catapulted remote learning or remote working into a whole new category, what we're doing right now. But to your point about the written word, absolutely critical in a remote environment because we are all dealing with massive amounts of email. We're dealing with text on our phones. We're dealing with instant messengers within our systems that come up in the middle of what we're doing. And and we're moving very fast. We also are more inclined to multitask in this environment. And so you got to be careful, because you may shoot off an answer, or you may shoot off a direction. And to your point about tone, it comes across like, whoa, she's not happy with me, or, oh my goodness, I thought I did that. You got to be really careful about that. I think in addition, you don't want somebody grading your writing either. So depending on, what the communication is, you need to be very cognizant of, your grammar and your punctuation and your spelling and, all of those kinds of things, especially if you're sending out communication to your employees or to your customers. Obviously, if you're just texting, that's a little bit of a different thing. But I think that the other thing we're working on right now, because since the whole world is working from home right now, we're doing this, or we're on the phone, and then the email's coming in. And so, again, going back to the multitasking, people are multitasking, and everybody's on email overload, because what you're also doing, because you're not with people in a face-to-face environment, is you're socializing through the email. And so, a colleague of mine looked yesterday, and we had a few email threads that could have been 2 or 3 emails that were like 10. And it was because somebody made a funny comment, and then somebody else made a funny comment, and then somebody else replied to all. And so, you sit down at the end of the day and you go, oh my goodness, I have 200 unread emails, and 10 of them are funny comments. So that's great in normal times. However, it's a time drainer. So very important point about writing. You need the other thing we always made our applicants do, we still have our applicants do. We have them now do a video lesson if they're a teacher, so that we can see how they interact on video, since it's such a prime medium for us. So you could do a mock, customer interaction in your scenario. And then we also have them do a writing sample. So we give them a writing task to do, so that we can actually see what their communication skill set is.
That's pre-hire?
What did you say, Brett?
I said, is that pre-hire? You give them that assignment? Okay.
Yeah, so it's part of the interview process.
So Julie or Mom, it's always awkward whether I call you Julie or Mom in these types of settings, but one thing that I've watched you do growing up, and even to this day, when you hear remote work environment, like you mentioned in some of your experience with interviews or interviewees, is you immediately think like relax, or PJs, or I'm going to have so much more time. And you've kind of adopted quite the opposite. You're somebody that schedules their workouts. You're somebody that has a very intentional day and week and month. And I think you've developed that muscle to become a very exceptional muscle over the years. But can you speak to a little bit about that? I think, when you wake up, you're in your PJs all day, and you're kind of just in reactive mode, some of the downsides of that, some of the challenges that with short-term, long-term, and kind of what you've adopted that's worked for you and what hasn't worked for you?
Yeah, for sure. So in my early years, I was one of those people that would carry around a little notebook, but never write in it. I could remember everything. And so, did I have a calendar? Sometimes, but I would always remember all of that. Not so much today. My brain is too full. So, what will happen in a remote environment? Well, there's a few scenarios that could happen, but the PJs is an interesting one. Now, prior to video, there would be days that we would laugh at each other, because you'd literally, roll out of bed, grab your coffee, go to your computer, and rarely move. You'd have to go, it's 3:00 in the afternoon, and you'd go, I think I'm hungry. And And then, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock would come, and you hadn't had a shower. You had only eaten peanuts. You had never left your seat. And it was like, oh my gosh, the day is over and I got to do it again tomorrow. And so it can be, incredibly draining. You tend to, when you are in a remote environment, you schedule things, pretty exceptionally all day long. You're in front of that computer almost all day long. So I really started to worry about work-life balance for everyone. If you're doing that, you're probably not having meaningful collaborative conversations as well. And so we started to really be intentional about, how do you have a healthy balance of work, life, play, exercise, health in this environment? Number one, if you're sitting all day, that's not good. And so you'll hear where people who've gone to a remote workforce situation, gain weight, or they're not eating healthy, or I don't know, name that kind of thing that comes with the fact that you're sedentary all day. So we started to encourage our teams to schedule some exercise breaks. And I know you guys do that. And we started encouraging them to do walk and talk. So if you have a conference call, just make it transparent that, let's do a walk and talk for this conference call, and get out of the house if you're in an area where you can, and walk that conference call. We do, I do schedule workouts, although not many lately, but I do try to schedule those workouts because otherwise they won't happen, because, there's never time. And for me personally, scheduling a workout that says, go on a walk or go to the gym oftentimes doesn't work, which is why for me, a personal trainer provides accountability, because if I make the appointment, I'll go to the appointment. So, and then in today's world where there's video, if you you're going to have interaction on video during the day, oftentimes for me, if I don't get up early and shower and put on my makeup and do my hair or what have you, it doesn't happen. And because the days are so packed. So the routine is pretty important. Then there are other people that get distracted, so that's why that private space at home is so important, because if there's dishes in the sink, or the lawn people are there, that can be very distracting as well.
And that makes sense. Thank you.
Julie, go ahead, Brett. Oh, please.
Okay, real quick. So you got the question of, as an employer or somebody, that's in charge of leadership, who's not used to a virtual work environment. Their first thought is, oh man, productivity loss. I can't manage what's being done, right? So how's that work, right? Is there being enough work done, right? I think that's normal reaction. But then the other side of the coin, which you kind of hit on, is then I have my team that gets used to this work environment, and they're actually working 10, 12 hours a day. Because I've seen you do email while you're watching a show at night, unwinding. And all that know my mom, she'll be reading a novel, answering email, and then watching her favorite show, right?
With a glass of wine.
With a glass of wine and unwinding, So, but which I love, but I can't do that. But so what do you do? Then you got your team that's working 12, 13 hours a day, right? So when do you shut it off? Or what would you say to somebody in regards to when do they shut it off? How, is it providing your own structure? Is it setting a specific time frame? Is it having conversations with your family? What are those conversations that you coach people to make sure that there is, balance with people?
So I kind of established a protocol of different types of communication for different types of circumstances. And so what I tell my team is, if I don't need an answer for 24 hours, email is good. If you don't need an answer from me, send me an email for, in 24 hours. If you need me, pretty quickly, but in a timely fashion, send me a text. If you need me right away, call me. And so that kind of establishes a little bit of a guideline for the communication. One of the other important things about a remote workforce, which you're alluding to, is respecting each other's time as well as your own. So over the years, this has been an interesting kind of paradigm. In my particular world, like if Bruce goes to play golf on a Saturday morning, I, kind of look forward to the time, plan the time to have a cup of coffee, go out on the patio, take my laptop and dive in and methodically go through and get myself organized and clean up my email and read articles I didn't read during the week. And so that's like a little bit of a sacred time to me that I actually look forward to. I also spend a lot of time on planes now. So if I'm flying home or away in the evening, from 5 to 9 o'clock at night, obviously I'm going to be on email the whole time. Well, your employees watch your behavior, and then they feel like they have to react to your behavior. And so if I'm sending an email at 8 o'clock at night, they start feeling like they have to answer it at 8 o'clock at night. So back to my protocol, point of it is, if I need you to give me an answer at 8 o'clock at night, I'm going to text you or I'm going to call you. If I'm emailing you, that's tomorrow's work. Well, that still didn't work because people felt like, oh my gosh, if she's emailing me, I need her to know that I'm emailing too. So I've started to do things like, if I'm working late at night, I'll use the delay delivery function. So the email doesn't arrive to their inbox until in the morning at 8 o'clock. So those kind of norms also take place, but you do need to be aware, whether it's for yourself or for your employees, the work is always there when you're at home. And I mean, if you have a computer with you and you can access, it's always there anywhere, but there's still something about leaving an office at 5 or 6 o'clock at night and feeling like you're done with the day, and other people feeling like you're done with the day. So, setting those parameters of, is it urgent? Or is it something that can wait? I think that's a norm you have to set within your company. And then you have to help everybody understand it. So, at one point, it was a little bit kind of like almost annoying to me because everybody has their different schedules and their different lifestyles. And for me, in my particular situation, not having kids at home for much of the time, off hours were easy for me to work. And, I would tell people all the time, just because I'm working doesn't mean you need to be working. You have to be able to self-police and monitor your time. That doesn't always work.
That's a great point.
Such rich information.
Well, I will tell you, I'd like to take maybe these last 7 or 8 minutes and just kind of allow us to open up. Obviously, I know your phone and your email and your texts are blowing up right now as the world, and whether it's private or public, schools or institutions are trying to figure out, for those that are not set up for virtual education, is how they get there and how they get there quickly. And so before we do that, I think, Rod, you had a question before Brett led off, if you want to hit that.
Yeah. What I was thinking, and Julie, I don't know if you heard me, so much rich information this morning. I just can't tell how much I appreciate it. This is going to help not only me as a leader, it's going to help me as a just a part of a team, as far as how I lead, how I communicate, how I conduct my own business. So I'm super appreciative of this. Couple things. First thing I thought about, and I wrote this down before you talked about the walk and talk, is our commercial Monday call. I thought, how cool would that be to have a walking Monday call with everybody?
That'd be really
so that you can consider that done, and I can't wait to tell the team where I learned that. But two more things. We've learned the term over legislate from Todd back in the day, and Todd was I know Todd's close with you. I think about over legislated, but I think about how important would it be to Skype daily with team members, key team members, or everybody on your team for that matter, depending upon the size of your team. And then, so that's part one. Part two is you set the guidelines for a home office. And as I'm sitting here, I've got my dogs are here, my wife is here, my Susan's here, my son's here, and I'm sitting here trying to be as engaged as I can, but I hear, beepers going off when doors open, and I had to text Susan and tell her to put the dog away, and
right.
I
That's
just
reality.
right. So as my dogs are barking in the background, so I just think to myself, number one, I've got to be able to walk the talk of the right virtual environment. But once you lay those guidelines, and I ask this question because I'm curious as to your opinion as to how it affects us. Once we set those guidelines for a home workspace, then what? Do you just trust that it's been adhered to, or do you like say, let's FaceTime, show me your environment? So those are the two questions that I have.
Okay, I'm going to answer the second one first. You're going to have to remind me of the first ones. That's what happens when you get old. It's both. You have to set the guidelines, but then you have to have different ways that you can identify whether or not they're being adhered to, and that happens if you're communicating effectively with your teams. That will happen pretty much on its own. I go back to the trust factor and productivity, which then, kind of clearly drives or tells a story about what must be going on in that workspace. But what would happen in our particular environment is, you'd be on a conference call, and, I have 3 dogs here, and, they'll occasionally bark. I've gotten into the habit of, if they're in my space, if I'm not talking, I hit mute. And then of course, you start talking and everybody are like, Julie, you're on mute, but it's almost like I go on mute, I go off mute, I go on mute, I go off mute. So then to your point about your first question, how important it is to do a daily Skype, I think it's actually a really healthy practice. It could be a 15-minute stand-up call, but something where everybody comes together. And, we do coffee chats, 9 o'clock or 8:30 in the morning, everybody comes together for a coffee chat. And at that point, you can do a little bit of a round robin on what are your goals today, anything you need from me, and just kind of get a sense of community. We would do at the dinner table when the kids were younger, what was your high, what's your high low for the day? You can do that with your staff. What was your high low yesterday? And just have a little bit of time together to have that FaceTime, I think is pretty critical. Some companies do one in the morning and one at the end of the day. If you have a beginning and an end to your day, sometimes that's productive. Sometimes that's overkill. But I think it's pretty healthy to do that. The other thing too is, if you're going to reach out to your employees, use FaceTime sometimes. And if you use FaceTime sometimes, you're going to get a sense of what the environment is like. And I think that if you're in touch with your employees, you'll know.
Mm-hmm. Love that answer. Thank you.
Yeah, so you've shed a lot of light on a few things to kind of highlight this conversation. Focus on outcomes rather than time. And I think that from an employer's perspective, being clear on what you expect, how you will track those outcomes, also be cognizant of a schedule and a routine amongst your flexibility. But I think what you've talked about a lot, that as leaders, whether it's us or anybody listening, is the over communication part. You can't, be too engaged and whether it just be checking in to see how somebody's day is or checking in to see how the ball has moved forward on a specific project. Because that's one thing, the word intention comes up a lot. And specifically when you have a group of people that are working remote, I think there's a human nature tendency to be more reactive than proactive. So I think it takes intention by that leader or by that leadership team to set some desired outcomes with timelines to say, hey, have we moved the ball forward, and continue to move it forward. So I'd really like to open it up for any closing thoughts, Julie/Mom, that you have about this situation or what you're working on, or any encouragement for those employers that have gone virtual and they're not used to it, and it's a weird muscle, or for that staff member that really values structure and now they're totally thrown off, confused, and overwhelmed. Anything among that realm that you could speak on just in these last minute or two?
I think this is probably probably about it. It's an incredibly challenging time for both the worker and the leaders in terms of moving from an office environment to a fully remote environment, no question. If you are a remote environment, people know what they're signing up for, and certain people like that, and certain people, are starved for human interaction in that environment. And it is interesting to watch as people say, gosh, I love working remotely. I'm communicating with everybody so much more than I ever would be if I were in the office. And then you have others that feel very isolated and, oftentimes a little bit around introvert, extrovert tendencies, et cetera. So, I think for a leader, this is a wake-up call that you need to have a contingency plan. You need to have the tools that are necessary to go remote if needed. And so find some ways now to kind of, work this into your workday, whether you're in the office or not. Have some meetings with customers that are on Zoom or that are on Skype. And so everybody becomes familiar with the tools in case they are in a situation where they do have to use them all the time. I think for a leader, this is all about situational leadership. You're going to have some people that are just thriving. They're going to love this, and you're going to see their productivity go off the charts. We always talk about the fact that my colleague and I, Amy, talk about the fact that we're often most productive when we are fully virtual as opposed to when we're in the office. So we look at our productivity differently. While we're in the office, while we're in Arizona, we really focus on FaceTime activities, building relationships, having those kinds of conversations and meetings that work best in a face-to-face environment. When we are home and working remotely, that's when you dig in and you get, details done, projects done, follow-up done, et cetera. So for a leader, they're going to have to really, really reach out to each individual person and say, how you doing? Tell me about your day. What are you struggling with? What are you feeling success with? And then what I suggest is that you set up a type of mentor program, so to speak. And so for people who are struggling, or people who are new in a regular remote environment, they should have a buddy. They should have a mentor that they, are online with all day, whether it's, some kind of chat situation where they can reach out. We also see, we're setting up Zoom rooms. So the Zoom rooms can be for IT, they can be for, in our situation, parent questions, students pop in for tutorings sessions. But for you or for other companies, you could have a Zoom room that's just, there are different people who are very skilled at this that are there, or the leaders are there, and an employee can pop in and either have ask a question to the whole group or have a private question, but they know somebody's there for them. And then training. This is a time where you may want to be doing some 15-minute, 30-minute trainings with your staff on how do I manage my calendar, how do I schedule my time. I don't know, your specific business, I don't know the details well enough to identify, but we do, how do I do behavior management all online? How do I engage parents all online? What do I do that I can engage kids when they've stepped away? We're doing virtual recess. We're doing some virtual happy hours. Just all those kinds of things. In this particular environment, the leader needs to be really cognizant of the struggling employee.
That's fantastic. It's almost like understand what outcomes, ask better questions, and then you can come to the solutions virtually. Well, Julie, thank you so much for your time. I know we have to force you off of this Skype call. I know you'd be with us for longer, but I also know that we want to honor your next appointment. So I know for the three of us that we couldn't appreciate it more. And I know for the listeners, they will get a ton of value from this. So thank you for all you're doing within the education space, the virtual education space, but also the world.
Thank you. Thank you. I love you all. Bye.
Thank you very much, Julie. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.